Uhuru, brothers and sisters and comrades, thank you for coming to participate in this discussion. My name is Omali Yeshitela, and I'm chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. I'm leader of the Uhuru movement and the African revolution that's occurring globally. As you know, this message to the African nation has as its title, Trump, Garvey, Leonard Peltier, and the crisis of colonialism. I think the title is something that's referred to by people who do social media and internet as clickbait. We use these names and terms with the assumption that people will be drawn to the discussion, partially because this is something that, as people who work social media, frequently referred to as trending. And so, having said that, I make the assumption that people who've been lured to this meeting by clickbait won't be here very long. It's not because we don't have something very important to say, but the fact is that I am not going to be speechifying and trying to make a speech to you and trying to get something to you within what has generally been defined as an amount of time that people have in terms of an attention span when it comes to social media. We need to have a discussion. I want to have a conversation. That's what I'm here for. And we need to have a discussion because this is a very critical moment in history. It's a time that we refer to often as where history is condensed, and things that used to take years to occur in history are happening within a matter of months and weeks and days, and sometimes even hours. And we need to talk about it because it's critical. One of the things that we want to talk about, of course, is the election of Donald Trump. And this is necessary because there are a lot of people who, especially some Africans, who've been misled by African people to such an extent that we see no alternative to an ability to achieve a future outside of the Democratic Party of the United States, as somehow the election of Trump represents a disaster in terms of our expectations of the future, which means that we do not presume to have agency of our own. We have not concluded with the batch of leadership that now prevails, that we have a responsibility and a capacity as African people, like all other human beings on the face of the earth, to carve out our own future, to make our own future, to say that we know that our children will have that future, not because a good white man or a good Negro woman is going to be elected president of the United States, but because we have fought to take that future in our own hands. We recognize that history did not begin with the election of Donald Trump. It did not begin with the failure of Kamala Harris to be selected as the black face of a colonial system that oppresses African people and has done so long before Donald Trump was ever born. So we need to talk about some things. And I'm aware that most of you are conscious of the fact that we're having this discussion today just a little more than a month after the Uhuru Three, after me, as the leader of the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement, and two other comrades who are part of our movement, the Solidarity Front of our party, were in Tampa, Florida in a federal court. And we were in Tampa, Florida in a federal court because the United States government had attacked us 5 o'clock in the morning here in St. Louis. They came with armored vehicles, they came with flashbang grenades, they came with battering rams, knocking down doors and things like this. And they said they came because they wanted to serve a search warrant. And they said they were serving a search warrant because they were indicting a Russian in Russia later that day, and that my name came up on the indictment. And so they were serving this search warrant because the indictment accused me and members of our movement of being Russian agents, of being people who work for Russia. And this was a very serious kind of charge, and it came with possible 15-year prison sentences and a possible $250,000 fines that would have been imposed on us to rob us, strip us of all the resources they could, and to terrorize us, terrorize our communities, and to frighten you. And so that they would criminalize the struggle for Black people. They would criminalize, they would say that if African people are complaining, it's not anything because anything is wrong with the United States. It's not anything because of our treatment here in the United States or any place in the world for that matter. It's because Russia or some foreign government, and especially if that government appears to be white, it's because we were told to do so. It is they who are actually working and speaking through our thick Black lips and not us ourselves. This is the attack that they made on us. And one reason this is important, there are 1,000 reasons this is important, of course, because the fact is that we're going to continue to struggle, regardless of what happens to me and the Uhuru Three, the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement. We plan to lead this struggle to victory. We plan to be alive and see what Garvey talked about, the flag, the red, black, and green planted on the hilltops of Africa, where Black people will be free globally. So we intend to do that. But I think it's important to talk about this in the context of something that we talk about, the election of Donald John Trump, which has terrified many people. But also we talk about the issue of Marcus Garvey at a time where on his way out of the White House, at a time where Biden is slinking away from the pretext of power, at the time, though he may have forgotten what it was about, the fact is he talked about pardoning and did offer a pardon more than 100 years later of Marcus Garvey. And of course, that's in addition to being hypocritical. It is a hell of a statement to come from somebody who represents a colonial power. And they would talk about giving a pardon to Marcus Garvey, and his crime was what? His crime was struggling for the liberation of African people. Even the New York Times, when they reported on this pardon of Garvey, had to talk about how Garvey had created economic development for African people. He had created the Black Star Line and other things like that. He talked about how Marcus Garvey influenced Malcolm X, and Marcus Garvey influenced people even like Dr. Martin Luther King. In fact, he quoted King saying what a role that Marcus Garvey had played. And so here we have this guy, this person going out of the White House, talking about pardoning Marcus Garvey. And of course, it's an insult, and it's something that we never would have fought for, not directly. We ended up fighting for it. I mean, it wasn't just an easy choice that was made. They always knew that Marcus Garvey was not a criminal. But at the same time, he's doing this is Biden's administration, Kamala Harris, the one that lost the election to Donald John Trump, who we are told is a proto-fascist. It was Biden administration that sent armed forces to our homes, to homes attacking a movement that has defined itself as 21st century Garveyites. And we have done this not just in the contest with the United States, but in the contest with all the other forces who pretend to love freedom and who pretend to love the idea of Black people being free, even like the New York Times belatedly comes up with this statement about what Garvey represented in the real world. The fact is that the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement have been fighting for Marcus Garvey, fighting and became Garveyites. In fact, it was Garvey who gave us the red, black, and green flag that's so ubiquitous even today, more than 100 years later. You see African people with the red, black, and green. And we established here at the Uhuru House, where I'm standing now in St. Louis, a 50-foot flagpole. In the middle of economic development work we were doing, just like Garvey was doing economic development work that was neutralizing, that was negating the power and the influence of colonial domination. We put a flagpole, a 50-foot flagpole with a 15 by 25-foot red, black, and green there, that black people stopped their cars and busloads of school children stopped, and they would take pictures because the Garvey lives in the red, black, and green flag. And even when this attack was made on us as recently as July 29, 2022, with the tanks and with the flashbang grenades and with the armed military forces called the FBI, even as this happened on July 22nd, the fact is a few days prior to that, on July 7th, the flag, red, black, and green flag of Garvey at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida, the other center that they would attack of the African People's Socialist Party of Marcus Garvey, was torched. And someone got out of a car in broad daylight with a military grade flamethrower and torched the red, black, and green that was there. Garvey lives. They know about Garvey. So this thing about apologizing or pardoning Garvey, when it is they who have committed the crimes against African people, when it is even the Biden administration, they're talking about a Joe Biden who in the 1960s was opposed to the Civil Rights Bill that would have brought any kind of rights to African people in this country, who was opposed to even the thing that liberals claim to be so enamored by, busing of Black people, because he didn't want his children, as he said, to go to school in a jungle. And his children didn't go to school in the jungle. His children went to Ukraine. And they went to China, and they made deals, and one of them at least was a obvious cocaine user, and they still haven't explained how that cocaine got in the White House, although it shouldn't be easy, it shouldn't be difficult to explain it, because we've seen pictures of Hunter Biden naked, alone in a bathtub, with somebody taking pictures. I think may have done a selfie of while he was smoking crack cocaine. This is what we are talking about. And Marcus Garvey, of course, played a critical role in the struggle. And Marcus Garvey was not just somebody who was there. He represented the largest anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movement in history. There, you can't name another movement that had 11 million people stretched across the globe who saluted the red, black, and green, who came up with the slogan and fought for one Africa, one nation, who fought for Africa for Africans at home and abroad. That was Marcus Garvey. That was a critical development in the struggle, not only of African people, but the struggles of the peoples around the world. And it's worth mentioning this. I'm talking about Garvey. I'm talking about the fact that Biden took it into his lily white heart to pardon Garvey. And people are struggling with that. Why would Biden do that? And of course, one reason Biden did that is because it was impossible to ignore the fact that everybody else in the world was recognizing, and especially the work that the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement has been doing now for the last 60 years. Raising up Marcus Garvey to the world, even in the face of having to fight so-called Black progressives and so-called Black communists and Black nationalists who would not hold up Marcus Garvey because they preferred W.E.B. Du Bois. And I'm not knocking Du Bois in this instance, because the fact is that Du Bois did some important work, but one of the most important things he did was participate in and gave leadership to the struggle of Garvey must go. That contributed to popular base for the government's attack on Marcus Garvey. They said Black people are saying Garvey must go. And even that wasn't enough. I was just looking the other day. People should read this book by Tony Martin, Race First. And there's a quote in there that he makes about the United States government attack from Marcus Garvey. And he talks about, and that quote was the Attorney General of the United States at that time, after they had put Garvey in prison. And like with the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, they come up with a fake charge that carries no weight at all. Nobody believed that the African People's Socialist Party was working for Russia. They didn't care whether you believed it or not. They just had the guns. And they thought they could get away with it. And they thought they could get away with it because they did not understand the depth of the movement that we have been building that would make it necessary for them to say, we pardon Marcus Garvey. But we had built such a movement. And that's part of the reasons why they had to talk and do have to talk about Marcus Garvey today, of the work that we have done, the work that we continue to do, because Garvey lives, because African people are still colonized today, just as we were more than 100 years ago. And so this is, part of what it is that we want to mention, and that an immediate consequence of the election of Donald John Trump, was the necessity for Joseph Biden to distinguish himself. That is not necessarily as an individual, as a person, but he is the person who was against civil rights, the Civil Rights Bill. He is the person who was against what people characterized as busing in this country. So now that he's out of office, the Democratic Party lost that election. Kamala Harris is not going to be the next Obama in drag. This kind of change has occurred, and they have to now look at how to try and regain the support of the African people who decided that they were not going to vote for the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has never, ever, ever done anything for African people, who decided they were not going to vote for a Democratic Party that was murdering Palestinian people on a regular basis every day that people could see, destroyed to the total Gaza, and has done an effective job of bombing and killing intrusions into the West Bank and Palestine. Black people were not going to go along with that. Black people, Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims were opposed to that. And so that impacted on the base of the Democratic Party. And so Biden needs to be able to try to recapture some of that, even if he doesn't want to do it himself. He represents a sector of the bourgeoisie. As you know, that an election is nothing but a nonviolent contest between different sectors of the bourgeoisie, of the white ruling class, the colonial ruling class, for control of the state and for their own political and economic benefit. We talk about the state, we're talking about the police, we're talking about the court system, we're talking about the FBI, the CIA, the military, all of those things that guarantee a particular a class is going to be in power, a particular system is going to be in power. And so here we have Biden having to make some, pass off some kinds of appeasement, some appearance of unity with the aspirations of Black people. And he ain't going to contribute to freedom, but he can talk about pardoning Garvey. And he puts himself on some kind of moral high ground because he's going to pardon Garvey. Who's going to pardon Biden? Oh, speaking of pardons, because that is an issue that we're looking at too, isn't it? Because Biden pardons Garvey. Now he talks about being commuting the sentence of Leonard Peltier. And he talks about pardoning other people who, several, maybe more than 1,000 people he's talking about pardoning now. And that seems like a sure act of generosity. But the problem is that what Biden has to do is to cover up the fact that he pardoned his crooked son. He's pardoned his crack smoking son. He's pardoned and our children are locked up on a daily basis around crack and marijuana and other kinds of things like that. But he's going to pardon his son. He's going to pardon his son who function as agents of Russia and China, or Ukraine and what have you in China, and made these kind of economic deals that taints even the whole Biden family, including Joe Biden himself. So he covers that up. He covers the necessity and often explanation. Why would you pardon your son? You lied. You said you were not going to do it. You said it over and over again that you would not pardon your son, even if he were convicted, and you did it. So why did you do it? And so to take the point away, to obscure that contradiction, he creates the situation of offering these pardons to everybody. He's pardoned all the people who were participating in his administration for the potential, he says, that Trump may indict them. He's pardoned Garvey. He's commuting the sentence of Leonard Peltier. Make no mistake about it. We are happy to see Leonard out of their clutches. We fought for Leonard Peltier for years and years. We were just looking at pictures of our party participating in San Francisco in demonstrations calling for the liberation of Leonard Peltier. And I was looking at this picture. My granddaughter, who is the Southern Regional representative of our party, when she was 3 years old or so, her father, who was the leader of our party in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay area, is in a demonstration calling for the freedom of Leonard Peltier, holding her hand. And we reintroduced the whole question of colonialism. We said that Leonard Peltier is a victim of colonialism, that regardless of these false charges that they have imposed on him, and what makes them false is not whether or not he shot an FBI agent or not. What makes them false is because the charges that were imposed on Leonard Peltier were imposed on indigenous people's land that's been stolen from settlers who took the land and made laws that would justify the imprisonment of any indigenous person there. And we've always stood with Leonard Peltier and the indigenous people. We were at Big Mountain when the U.S. government had discovered there were uranium and other resources on Big Mountain where the Diné or Navajo people reside. And they had said they were going to take a stand, and they asked people to come to Big Mountain and take a stand. And we went to Big Mountain to take a stand with the indigenous people there because we understood colonialism was a critical question. And they would turn it into an incident at Big Mountain. They would turn it into an incident with Leonard Peltier, when it was not Leonard Peltier as an individual that they attacked. They attacked the rights of the indigenous people to struggle to win back their freedom. They attacked the opposition to settler colonialism, to the whiteness that has been imposed on this country. And the thing that's complicated, not really complicated, because the party, the African People's Socialist Party, for the last 60 years or so, I say 60 years because even prior to our existence, those who were precursors to the party have fought against colonialism. And we came into existence more than 40 years ago as a party with the statement that we were going to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s, the revolution that they thought they had crushed, and they had actually defeated that revolution militarily. And when we say they defeated a military defeat, what we're talking about is the assassinations of people like King, people like Malcolm X, the assassinations, the massive imprisonment of our people that crushed the struggle against colonialism. You didn't hear the articulation that we're fighting against colonialism anymore. They propped up and put in place neo-colonial puppets. And thus the forces that we've had to deal with in our communities up to now, they are the ones who were Garvey must go at that particular time. They know what we stand for. They neo-colonial forces know what we stand for. Yet places where you have African mayors like St. Louis, Missouri, would work with the federal government, and he used the police and the federal government when they would come to attack the Uhuru movement. They claim to be people who stand for reparations. But the fact is, it's the Uhuru movement, and specifically the African People's Socialist Party, that put the reparations issue on the ballot, that made it something that was a household word throughout this country. We held the first World Tribunal on reparations for African people that happened any place in the world, using international law as the basis for doing that. We did it for something 11 or 12 years. We did that. And so you have Negroes who claim they stand for reparations, who conspired work with the federal government to attack our movement. The same thing is true in St. Petersburg, Florida. The other place they located, they attack. Don't you think there's some significance to that? That they still attacking Garvey? They attacked Garvey in St. Louis. They attacked Garvey in St. Petersburg, Florida, when they came with tanks. They knocked down the doors. They burned the red, black, and green flag of Garvey. They attempt to destroy the economic development programs that Garvey had initiated some years ago that we continue to follow through with. And like Garvey, they wouldn't say that we are trying to crush the Garvey movement because you're bringing economic development to Black people, because you're trying to unite the African world so that it can be free. We're attacking Garvey because you broke some law, because in selling the stock for the Black Star Line, they created a steamship line for African people, the first time and perhaps the only time in history. They said that we are jailing Garvey because he used the mail illegally. But there was a guy who was an attorney general at the time, because even after they had put Garvey in jail, sent him to a penitentiary, and told, and there were members of the Garvey movement who were trying to do something similar for Garvey that was just done for Leonard Peltier, and who was trying to get the president to free Garvey. And this appeal went to the Attorney General of the United States, the same ones that they say that we should have told that we were Russian agents so that we wouldn't be violating the law. So the Attorney General at that time wrote a letter to the president saying, look, we've got this appeal. Check out Tony Martin's book, Race First. We've got this appeal from supporters of Marcus Garvey. And they say that Garvey should be free. And this is a real disturbing situation, they said, because we put Garvey in prison because we claimed that he was involved in gypping and cheating African people. But the people who African people are saying that we put him in jail because he was working for Africans' freedom. They say they don't believe that. They want Garvey to be free. They said this is what the Attorney General was saying. And the letter, I think, was to Coolidge. Was it to Calvin Coolidge that this letter went to from the Attorney General? And he said this is a very disturbing kind of situation, because then it was a lie, just like it's a lie now. So they arrest us. They charge us with a potential 15-year prison sentence, a $250,000 fine for each one of us. But because we fought back, we were able to push back, defeat this whole notion that we were Russian agents. They couldn't justify, they couldn't even get a jury to say they were Russian agents. So they tricked the jury and had them convict us from conspiring to be Russian agents. In other words, to conspire to do something that didn't happen without notifying the Attorney General. And even the judge was able to say he sounded like that FBI agent who wrote to Coolidge, and thinking that would have been something like 1927, if I'm not mistaken, and said there's something very disturbing about the situation. The judge said, I'm disturbed by this. He said, we got a 5-year sentence, but I'm disturbed by this law that's used against them. He said that I'm disturbed because, one, that if it weren't for the question of them registering as the foreign agents, the only thing we're talking about is free speech. And he said that an issue here is that we were charged with being conscious agents of Russia, but the government didn't have to prove that we knew it was necessary to register as Russian agents. He said that's the disturbing thing for me, and the jury didn't have to rule on the fact of whether we knew that we were violating the law when we didn't register as Russian agents. And so he sounded just like that FBI agent. He says he's troubled. Of course, this judge had to look out also. He had to receive 1,600 letters calling for the freedom of the Uhuru Three. He had to look every day at the hundreds of people who come out to support the Uhuru Three. And he was quite conscious of it, because even when he talked about the issue of a possibility of the $100,000 fine that the prosecution had asked for me, he said, no jail time, no fine. He said, because the fine is supposed to punish an individual. He said, but if I fine you, you're just going to raise the money to pay the fine anyway. So the judge is aware of who we are, what we do, etc. And we knew he was aware of who we are, because the first day when we went to trial, there was an attempt to identify us as some kind of Black Lives Matter. And the judge said, no, 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 no. Over here in Tampa, we refer to them as the Uhurus. And that was before any testimony had ever occurred in the trial at all. And so they knew who we were, just like they knew who Garvey was, just like all of them knew who Garvey was. And so, like Garvey had to fight against the neo-colonial of African petty bourgeoisie, so has been the case with us. But we've won, and we are being victorious. Another thing that was significant about the Trump election that does not get talked about is how it exposed the irrelevance of the African petty bourgeoisie, the African middle class, that social force that will always betray the Black revolution as a class. It will always, every instance, as a social force, it will betray the Black revolution, even though there are individuals who come from that class who will assume their responsibility and unite with the aspirations of the African working class, as a social force. They will always work against us. And so what we saw here with the election of Trump, that was worth noting, is that everything that the African petty bourgeoisie did fail to get Kamala Harris in office. Kamala failed, Obama failed in what he brought to him. Your favorite basketball player was unable to do it. Your favorite Negro television star woman was unable to bring African people to Kamala Harris, to bring her, to get Africans to vote in sufficient enough numbers and with enthusiasm and vigor that Kamala Harris will be able to beat Trump. And this is in the face of all of the work that the media had done to point to Trump as this fascist person who was going to bring nothing but disaster to African people. He was what they call a fascist or a proto-fascist, and sometimes not proto, but fascist right up front. So the African petty bourgeoisie, they were exposed in this process as being worthless. And they were exposed in this process of not having the influence that they thought they had. And in my opinion, they exposed in this process the fact that they have left the African working class, the African population defenseless, because it would have us rely simply on the Democratic Party, whoever's representing the Democratic Party at any given moment, as opposed to being able to rely on our own agency. The African petty bourgeoisie did not come out in support of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement when we came under attack, when they made this major assault on our free speech, when they came with guns and tanks and things like that to attack our offices and our homes. Not a single word from the majority of those forces who we consider the African petty bourgeoisie or middle class. And they would have us instead walk lockstep with Kamala, with Biden. And Biden, again, has an extraordinary record, not just in terms of his disdain of African people. You should remember what Biden said when Obama was first nominated for president. You know, he said, yeah, he's good, he's clean, as distinguished from other Black people. And when he wants to, he can speak good English. I mean, this is the kind of statement that Obama made. It's such powerful testimony to who it was that Obama and his family and all of those forces were sucking up to. So they would never been our friends. This is the Democratic Party. It's never been a friend of ours. And they also, right in broad daylight, participating in murdering all of these Palestinian people. And the problem with that, of course, is they do it with blackface. And they do it with blackface. They raise the specter of people who don't understand any better to assume that Black people support and united with what it is they're doing. So we saw the election of Trump and its implications for exposing the weakness of the African petty bourgeoisie. And what we have to do is understand that when we look at this weakness of the African petty bourgeoisie, We are looking at what it means in terms of our ability to lead and take responsibility ourselves. We're looking at the situation where the Democratic Party no longer presents itself as the only alternative we've got. The people can see that we are the alternative. When I say we, of course, I mean the African People's Socialist Party, and I mean the Uhuru movement. We've solved most of the problems that's blocked the revolutionary project in this country, which is one of the reasons they attacked us. But I'm talking about those of us with enough courage to assume responsibility for agency. Those of us who are colonized, the African People's Socialist Party, in fighting against these ridiculous charges mounted against us, pull together the hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa response. It's a movement with hundreds of different organizations and people across the world who united with this against colonialism. We have reintroduced in the most serious way the struggle against colonialism. You haven't seen that in a long time, which is one of the things that's influenced the need for this government to try to escape from its culpability in enduring colonialism with trying to free up Leonard Peltier and even this most obscene way that he's under house arrest and have to show some deference to Black people, apparently, with the issue of Marcus Garvey. You're going to see some people call themselves Garveyites who will be salivating and really appreciating this. I appreciate it because it shows the strength of our movement to rebuild the anti-colonial struggle. I appreciate this because the NAACP fought against Garvey when they first put him in prison. When they were in the front lines going, Garvey must go. The African petty bourgeoisie betrayed the revolution then, they portray it now as a class, as a social force. And I'm telling you, I know that you might be the petty bourgeoisie, some of you watching this, but I'm talking about as a class. I'm not talking about what individuals can do, because individuals can betray the interests of the petty bourgeoisie and unite with the interests of the African working class. We invite you to do that. That's why we're having this discussion of the African nation right now. So another thing that's really important about the election of Trump is that it fractured the international solidarity of the colonial powers of the world. By which I mean, this solidarity internationally revolved around something that has come to be known as the Atlanticist Bloc. The Atlanticist Bloc were the group of colonizers that dominated the world, that were colonizers. And at the end of the Second World War, we call it the Second Imperialist World War, they came to certain kinds of agreements. They said that we want to make it unnecessary for colonizers, for white people, to be killing each other like we do over the resources of the colonized peoples of the world. We can redivide the world without killing each other. Let's create this institution. And they used as a model the League of Nations, which is something that the United States had attempted to create during the era of Marcus Garvey. Under Woodrow Wilson. And the League of Nations was something that they could not get ratified in the U.S. Congress. And so it sort of withered away. And it also withered away as soon as the Second World War occurred, because it proved itself to be ineffective in terms of the peace that it said it was going to bring. So the League of Nations was supposed to bring peace. The World War, the United Nations was supposed to bring peace. And what they meant was they created what they characterized as a democratic colonial process, where the colonizers, who would be the main leaders under the United States of this United Nations, they would occupy what they call a Security Council, any one of whom could veto anything that the League of Nations, that the United Nations is going to do. And this Security Council, when the United Nations was founded, there was only 50 some odd so-called countries that were a part of it. I think there's 190 some odd that consider themselves countries today who may be members of the United Nations, but then there were only 50. And all of us, the vast majority of the world at that time, lived under colonial domination. All of the colonized people, for the most part, lived under colonial domination. So they created a racket where they can do a lot of talking and what have you, and colonized people and the 50 who were there could make noise and could raise their hand, but any one of the 5 could veto anything they said. And that 5 was Russia, Soviet Union, they called it, because the Soviet Union had come out of this second imperialist world wars, being a primary force that defeated Nazi Germany. And so it had a lot of juice, had a lot of influence. And then it was what they called then China, which is Taiwan, which was a puppet regime that's still out there right now, but it's no longer represented in the United Nations. It was France, the United States, and England. So these were the ones who could veto anything that happened within the United Nations. It was rigged. It was a rigged game from the very beginning. So, and they fixed it that way. And so they set this thing up so that you can have talk fests and people could have a sense of democratic participation. And they even created rules and things like that against violence and going to war. And these 5 people on the Security Council could veto anything anybody was going to do. So they were going to secure the peace of the world, making it unnecessary for the white colonizer to fight each other in order to get a piece of the colonial booty. And this was really important kind of thing that they tried to do. So the United Nations were created in part and the Atlantic Bloc included founding of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the basic trade and economic international economic entities like the International Monetary Fund. They created the World Bank and all of this stuff is under the United States leadership. And so this is how they were going to control the world. And one of the things that they created NATO and the United Nations for, the purpose of which was to contain Russia, and if necessary, to destroy Russia. So they had this collective body of forces. This is what it was about. I'm going on because I think it's extremely important for you to understand what's going on in the world. When you look at what's happening with Trump, you look at all these pardons, you look at the political dynamics in the world, is more than what they would talk to us about. You can't even read about it in things like the New York Times and the Washington Post. Now, they engage in self-censorship. They don't even write about what they did with the Uhuru 3. They don't even write about this. Was supposed to be a case of national security, and yet you couldn't read about it in the New York Times, the Washington Post, or any of those other journals like that of the bourgeoisie. So they engage in voluntary censorship. We're fighting for free speech, and they're not only fighting to keep us from shutting up, they won't talk about it themselves. So here's what we were looking at. And I think it's really important for us to recognize this kind of reality. So we had this arrangement that was created by the Atlanticist bloc. And Trump, when he ran for office, he ran against the system as it existed, because the Atlanticists were the ones who controlled the system. I'm not talking about just people in the United States. I'm talking about the Atlanticists, including the forces from throughout the Atlantic bloc. I'm talking about England, talking about France. You're talking about all of them, where Japan even played a role in the Atlantic bloc. And so Trump ran for office. He ran against NATO. Anybody remember that? He ran against the United Nations. He ran against the trade relationships that existed. In fact, he's doing stuff now talking about charging more resources for trade that's coming into the United States, et cetera. So he ran against that and convinced some people. I know somebody who's characterized as a Du Boisian that saw Trump as being some kind of revolutionary force because he was against the United Nations, because he ran this thing against these relationships like the World Bank and all of these trade deals, et cetera, that existed. And he ran against war. This was an extraordinary thing to see, Trump being the anti-war president and Hillary Clinton being the pro-war candidate. And so this was what that looked like during that time, because it was a struggle against colonialism and the existing world order. How it was being controlled, who was controlling it, and what have you. And so Trump came in, and why did Trump do this? He did it because there are trillions of dollars at stake in terms of Russia. because the Atlanticist bloc had done everything to isolate Russia economically, to do everything they could to make sure that Russia could not be successful economically, because it stood for, especially during the time of the Soviet Union, it stood for, at that time, the workers coming to power. And when it was first initiated, it was a response. The Russian Revolution itself came as a response to the dynamics that were created by the struggle against colonialism. And this is the thing that made Lenin, and this is the thing that made the Bolsheviks, and this is the thing that made the Russian Revolution happen, make it successful, and put it in a certain place in history, and at the expense of recognition of Garvey and recognition of the anti-colonial struggle that we're involved in. So here's Trump, and all of these resources are there in Russia, and you can name them. They're there. These minerals, the diamonds, and just oil, and all kinds of resources are there in Russia, and they're not being exploited properly, if you will. Because they've isolated Russia, none of the U.S. friends, none of the people who are part of the Atlantic bloc can even trade effectively with Russia. And Trump wants a piece of that action. And so do people who align with Trump. And so that's why so many of them, if you remember, they were arrested and some indicted, and I think even at least one of them in prison. Because they were functioning as they characterized as agents of Russia, because this was an entree by a new hustling group, a sector of the bourgeoisie in this country. And so Trump broke that down and opened the door to Russia, and it's changed a lot. You will see moving forward that the whole a relationship with Russia will change, not exactly like Trump had talked about it, because when he opened the door, he made it possible for all the other colonial bourgeois hustlers to come in too. He didn't walk through that door by himself. That's why you see everybody coming to kiss the ring and other parts of his body, to ingratiate themselves. He opened the door, and that was a bold thing to do, because none of them could do it. All of them wanted a piece of Russia, but Trump did it. And so now they are participating in the Trump administration, or they are people who are facilitating how Trump moves around the world. It's not just the way he was doing before. This is what we are looking at right now. And I just think it's important to recognize that it's not this little old thing that people are frightened of. It's not just this whole question of Trump being a bad person with a nasty attitude. He may be all those things. I'm not saying it, but he can't be badder, if you will, than Biden, or nastier, if you will, than Harris. They are a collection of badder, nastier people. They constitute the sectors of leading forces of oppression in the whole world. And they're fighting for their place, continued place in the world. Because when they opened the door in the fashion they did, they also lent greater credence, not necessarily intentionally, to Russia, to Putin, and to other forces like this. So now it's a whole change dynamic that we are looking at in the world. And Trump will do a lot of things. He jumped off the ground. He came out initially against what he called immigrants, and he didn't say he was going to make it retroactive. If he did, his ass would have to disappear. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say his ass. I think there's a word in French. What's it called? Derriere, something like that. Would have to disappear as well. But he came out of the gate. So he said, I'm sending troops to the border. I believe he can do that. And there are some other things that he said he's going to do that I think he can do, but he can't do everything he said he's going to do right away anyway. He's going to be able to do some things, and he has to do some things quickly to maintain the momentum and the confidence of his base, who came in opposed to that. And he would do some things possibly around the question of abortions and et cetera, and which is interesting, because if you remember, what was being promoted initially was that this was a gender-based election, and that people voted against Harris because she was a woman. And Obama went so far, I said Obama went so far as to say that African men, black men, wouldn't vote for Harris as some kind of sexist thing. But the reality is that the white women voted for Trump. White women voted for Trump. And the reality is that even though the Democratic Party in their initial struggle with Donald Trump, certainly this was magnified after Hillary Clinton lost the election, she denied Trump's victory because they made Trump an election denier, if you remember. They said Trump is an election denier. This is part of his criminality. But where did you first hear this election denial coming from? It came from Hillary. Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party said that Trump didn't win the election. Who won the election, they said? Russia won the election. It was Russia who did it. It was they who raised the Russia thing. It was they who targeted anybody who was associated with Trump as his connection with Russia. It was they who set up the terms this recent attack on the Uhuru movement by claiming that we were working for Russia. Anything that they did not get, anything that went against them, anything that exposed their weakness and their inability to control or contain support from masses of the people was done by Russia. They didn't assume responsibility for that. So here is one of the problems they have as it relates to that, because Trump just won again. And so, but I heard nobody saying that Russia did it this time, and that would be too blatant. He won the popular vote as well. So they can't say that he was able to win the Electoral College and therefore there's some shakiness about his popular support. He won the popular support and he won the electoral thing. So this is what happened in this election. I think that's really important for us to understand. So I just think it's really important for us to assume our responsibility here. And a responsibility is to continue to support the indigenous people, to look at what they have done, not only to Leonard Peltier, but what they continue to do with the indigenous people. I think that among the indigenous people, I think there's a lifespan of something in the 40s on these concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. This is a part of the colonial mode of production. The whole world economy, the whole world, not just England and France and the rest of them, the whole world economy revolves around colonial production, the colonial mode of production. It is the basic process that dominates how humans on Earth now engage in production of life. It's the basic process. It doesn't mean that China is involved in the concentration camps in the United States that they call Indian reservation. It doesn't mean that Russia is involved in that or in the so-called ghettos in St. Louis, but it means that the entire world economy, that's not separate from China or Russia, that they are struggling with to try to change the relationship to, that they are challenging. They are not trying to overturn this world economy, certainly not from what they're saying and what they're doing, even with the emergence of different kinds of economic entities that they've created to challenge to things like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They've done that, and that's important because it fractures the absolute control of the colonial powers of that. But the thing is that the China that we knew during the Revolutionary era was a China that was involved in trying to overturn the whole, what they call capitalist system, not just as it represented itself in a particular place in the world, but the whole world. It was a China that had confidence of the right and ability of the people to create a world that we can all live in without oppression and without exploitation. That was what happened. But now there's a contest within the mode of production, the colonial mode of production, about who can be able to be successful or more successful within that. I want to say that we cannot have this discussion without mentioning how on his way out, Biden also took Cuba off this list of supporters of terrorism. And, again, it's really hard to be able to stand here and talk to you about this with a straight face, when all the terror that's been waged against people in Cuba, without recognizing the fact that if Cuba and the heroic role that it has played in the revolutionary struggle of African and other colonized peoples here and around the world, that Cuba, at a time where people in this country have been stuck with Obamacare that Biden brags about today, Cuba, that was sending thousands of doctors to most oppressed sectors in the African world to deal with the health care of the people. It was Cuba, after Katrina, that tried to send doctors into New Orleans and was blocked from doing that by the United States government when there were no other doctors, no other support for the African people who were there. And so it's an insult of sort. But here you have a situation too, where this one regime is moving out, in this instance of the Trump regime, and another regime attempting to take its place. And it has not yet destroyed the fantasy of a popular basis for elections and things like that. And so the Democratic Party, good guy, bad guys, that we have not succeeded yet in creating the recognition of an alternative to either one of them. And we are the alternative. Yes, I mean the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, but I mean beyond that. I'm talking about in the 1960s, there was an incredible movement against colonialism that was led by the struggle against colonialism, that assumed ourselves to be the legitimate forces who would determine what the future of the world is going to look like, and did not concede the ability, the absolute authority of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to do those things. That's what we have to fight for. We have to recognize that with the weakness of exposure, of the weakness of the colonial state media, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and all the rest of them, the Washington Post, that we have to do everything we can to build the Burning Spear newspaper. We have to do everything we can to build our own media sources and to support all of these other media forces who stand with us and stand with the need to change the world, because we don't have to rely on the media, the ruling class media, when nobody else does. If the masses of the people are not relying on them, don't believe in it, don't support them, why the hell do we court them so assiduously? We have to be able to build our own and support our own and call on the people to support that and to protect it, because there's a threat that's out there today that they say is coming from threatened by the Trump administration, I hear, or some associations he's maybe affiliated with directly or indirectly, that's threatening the ability of people to be able to have our own media, to have our own capacity with the various kinds of what do you call it, non-profit entities, etc. We have to protect them, and we have to act like we have a right to do that. And what has to be done is everybody needs to support the situation with the Uhuru 3. You have to support that. You have to validate that. We're appealing these charges, because even though we beat what they call the main charge, Russian for aid, working for Russia, they still have convicted us as being conspirators to do something that didn't happen. And the judge himself contributed to our foundation for being able to win an appeal, but it's going to take money to do this too. They thought they would break us in the first go round. We spent perhaps $700,000 or so, almost $1 million in the defense. We got to spend another $100,000 with this appeal. Then we are calling on you to support that, work with that. Your disdain for the election of Trump, your disdain for Harris and the Democratic Party cannot be better expressed than to support the revolutionary trajectory of Africans and other colonized peoples around the world. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Uhuru. Vanguard up, Uhuru.